back, and it is question and answers video time. I know this one I've been promising for a while, but I'm happy to finally get around to doing this and answering some of your fan questions. So, before I get into that, I do want to talk about a little bit about my feelings on Backlash. I thought it was a fun show. Nothing major happened storyline-wise. No major title changes. I guess the women's tag titles changed hands, but that was no surprise or anything. Not exactly a life-altering moment that happened on the pay-per-view. But the French crowd was so lively that it added a lot of energy to the show, and it resulted in making for a good time. And also, the show was short. It was less than 3 hours long, and it was like, it was paced well, and it just felt nice, and it was just a nice, solid wrestling show with some fun energy to it. So that's my thoughts on Backlash. Nothing major happened, but it was still a fun show to watch. If more wrestling shows were paced like Backlash was, and you throw a couple of big moments on there to make it really worth my while, we'd be the overall quality of wrestling programming would be a lot better. AEW, take notes. But with all of that said, let's jump right into the questions. So, got a lot of questions from Multimedia Assassin, so I'm just going to go over all of these. From what you can remember, would you say wrestling in the Attitude Era, Ruthless Aggression Era, WCW, ECW, and early TNA 2002 to 2009 was more smash mouth, hard hitting, and story and character driven, fan engaging based on the fighting atmosphere, and focused on winning the match instead of showboating and showing off fancy schmancy moves and doing spot fests all the time like modern wrestling? Generally yes, but I was seeing a lot of that kind of spot festy style kind of come up in like a little bit in the late 90s, and especially in the early to mid 2000s is when it really started to take shape and become the monster that it is now. I started to notice it in ECW, where it felt like everybody would kick out of a finishing move, and it gets to a point where it's like, okay, so what's the point of having a finisher if everybody kicks out of it? And I remember thinking, and I was a teenager back then, I remember thinking that the angle slam, or the Olympic slam, whichever one you want to call it, I remember that move sucking as a finisher because Angle never beat anybody with it. And I'm like, what's the point of that move? It felt like he was doing it to get like a big pop for the 2 count, but I hardly ever saw him beat anybody with it. It felt like for a while. And thank God he picked up the ankle lock. But I was starting to see those bad habits take shape in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it exploded into what it is today, where every match has finisher kickouts, and which is unfortunate. What are your thoughts on the opinions of the Epic Universe, the new upcoming theme park at Universal Orlando? Well, I'll be honest with you, I didn't know anything about it. I don't go to theme parks regularly, so this was news to me, but I guess it looks neat. There's a Super Nintendo world and a Harry Potter world, and there's a Dark Universe world, which I can't believe that would be that big of a hit at this point, because nobody went to go see The Mummy, so I don't know like why. And when I say The Mummy, I mean the Tom Cruise version of The Mummy. But I love the Universal monsters, but man, they should be treated better. But yeah, it could be fun. I don't really have too big of an opinion about it, one way or the other, though. Which do you prefer to play more, video games or board games? Definitely video games. Board games, I've been to some parties where people insist on playing board games, and I get bored so quickly. Pun intended. I get so bored because it involves like an encyclopedia full of rules for a game that I've never played before. So I'm constantly having to play catch up with the people that know how to play the game, and it just drives me crazy. And it's like, I haven't played board games regularly since like, Stratego and Battleship back in like my grade school days. So, I went to one party and they were playing Settlers of Catan, and I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. I would need to like take the instruction book home, learn how to play it and study it, and then come back to the next party knowing how to play it. But at that point, it's like, that's just homework. I don't want homework to go to a party. So, I don't know. Board games has never worked for me. Video games, you can just pick up the controller and play. Whether you're good at it or not, you can just play it and figure it out as you go. And it's a little bit more natural and a lot more fun for me. Are there any movies you think deserve special edition DVDs and Blu-rays? the original Star Wars trilogy, the unaltered special, the despecialized versions, that deserves a major Blu-ray release, I think. That would be my number one pick. I'm trying to think of one that would be worthy. I would like to see, and this is me being a dork, but I would like to see like a major re-release of Transformers the movie, but with the deleted scenes added in, because there was a lot of stuff. If you look at the storyboards and the original script, and a couple of like deleted bits of animation here and there. There was a lot of stuff that was supposed to be in that movie that got cut out, and I would like to see like the completed version, like a director's cut with like the deleted scenes and the unanimated scenes like put back into it. But that will never happen. That will never see the light of day. But it would be really cool if it did. I've seen there's a fan-made version that I've seen online, but it's fan-made. The quality can only go so far. But that would be a fun one if it ever got pulled off. What are some of your favorite mythologies? I was a big Greek mythology fan when I was a kid, and that's part of that is because I loved Clash of the Titans so much in my youth. But I love Greek mythology with all the different monsters and creatures running around. Egyptian mythology is pretty cool too. Norse mythology is pretty good, but Greek is where it's at in my mind. Do you think moderate Americans have no voice in America anymore? It certainly feels that way because, you've got the right, and I am I'm officially registered as unaffiliated, so I don't have no party affiliation because I hate Republicans and I really hate Democrats. And when I say I hate Republicans and Democrats, I mean the people running the parties, not the actual voters, because I think most voters mean well. It's just you've got corrupt jackasses running everything. But the moderate voice in America, you always get called either a liberal douche or a right-wing extremist Nazi, and you get it feels like being moderate, like I get called all of the things that both sides get, the extremes of both sides get called, or worst of all, they call you a fence sitter or non-committal. You got to join the cause or whatever. I'm like, screw you people, you suck. And so nobody wants to listen to that. They want the voices that play to the fringe extremes of both sides. So the moderate side, it feels like there is no voice for us anymore, unfortunately, because it's we're not sexy, we're not interesting, we're just we don't say over the top crazy inflammatory things. We just kind of I've called politicians in sweeping generalizations every name in the book, but who wants to listen to that? If there's one group I'm prejudiced against, it is our elected officials. They can kiss my ass and go to hell, and every other body part in between, because fuck them. But that's my take. All right, next question. What do you think? Why do you think Tony Khan likes to mindlessly hire a whole bunch of wrestlers, but can barely book a quarter of AEW's overbloated roster? I think a lot of it he wants to keep them away. He wants to say, look who I got away from WWE. Look who I snatched from WWE. And sometimes it's a big deal and sometimes it's not. And it's amazing to me that they have all that programming and yet all that talent that they never know what to do with. And it's just like, guys, they'd be in a much better position if the matches weren't so long on TV every week. It's like, I was watching a couple weeks ago, and Edge and somebody else, I think it was Buddy Murphy, they had a match that went like half an hour, and I was like, dude, like, come on, that could be a 10-minute match, and just make your point and keep the story rolling. You'd have a lot more room for stories, promos, angles, the things that most wrestling shows should be centered around. And WWE is guilty of that too. Their matches have gotten insanely long on TV every week, and it's to eat up all that time that they have. And it's like, it would be a lot more exciting if the matches weren't so long. That's just my take. All the time. It's like, you want to build to a big match and do it on a pay-per-view or a special episode of TV, that's one thing. But to do these type of matches all the freaking time, it's just exhausting. And it prevents you from, it prevents other guys from getting used, because if so-and-so, if Edge is out there, or Adam Copeland is out there doing half-hour matches every week, or the Young Bucks are out there doing half-hour matches every week, or Kenny, when he was out there, is doing half-hour matches every week. That's, a lot of time that could go to somebody else and try to get over. But, it is what it is. Do you think the WWE should do the draft every 2 years instead of annually? I don't think they should do the draft ever again. I think it was it's just so pointless. Like, if they're not going to get to a point where Raw and SmackDown feel like completely different shows, then the draft is completely meaningless in my eyes. It's just it's red WWE and blue WWE. I don't care. If we got to a point where SmackDown had its own identity and Raw had its own identity, and being on either show created more interesting scenarios. I've talked about the title situation where, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, like, a tag team that's been a tag team for, let's say the Usos, because they're split up now, but let's say they were tag team champions forever, and then they got drafted to the show that doesn't have a tag division, and then they went off on their own that way. Let's pretend like all the stuff that they did in the Bloodline just didn't happen. And then you'd have to watch the two tag team partners compete with each other and compete within the singles ranks and things like that. There's like interesting possibilities they could do if the two shows were just different from each other. And not even just the title situation, but personality-wise. Like, I remember at one point in the mid-2000s, like, 2004 specifically, like, Raw was like classic blood and guts NWA, and SmackDown was like Saturday morning cartoon BS, you know, and it's like, look, I mean, SmackDown was stupid and Raw was by far the better show, but at least they had different identities, and there was like a legitimacy to the brand split because you're getting two completely different shows out of it, and that's something that hasn't been the case for a long, long time. So to me, it's like, I'd be fine if they just didn't do the draft anymore, because I don't see the point of it, quite honestly. And final question, what do you think of The Rock's recent heel turn and his new final boss character? I think it was outstanding, added a lot of energy heading into WrestleMania 40, breathed a huge new life into the Bloodline storyline and Roman Reigns' title reign, which made his ultimate defeat all the sweeter. I think Rock played a huge role in making WrestleMania 40 a lot more special than it would have been otherwise, and I thought he was great. So yeah, no complaints from me. I think Rock was outstanding with all of that. All right. Next set of questions are from Joshua, also known as Asia Extreme Infinity, longtime viewer of the show. Thanks again for participating. Who is on your Mount Rushmore of wrestling? It's funny because on Twitter a lot of questions float around of like, who's the Mount Rushmore of tag teams? Who's the Mount Rushmore of cruiserweights? Who's the Mount Rushmore of WrestleMania main eventers? And blah blah blah, all this other stuff. But if I'm gonna do overall wrestling. And a lot of this is going to have bias from like my lifetime because, you know, Luthez so far outside my experience that it's hard for him to resonate with me. But if I was going to do a Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling, for me it would be like the four icons of the industry. For me it would be Hogan, Austin, Rock, and either Flair or Andre would be my number 4. So that would be my pick. Are those my 4 favorite wrestlers of all time? No. That would be, you know, that list would look something like Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, Bret Hart, and either Sting or Shawn Michaels. But if we're talking like the big wrestling icons that would constitute a Mount Rushmore, it would be Hogan, Rock, Austin, and then either Flair or Andre, one of those two. So that's my take. All right, next. How do you feel about Anthem Sports firing Scott D'Amore from TNA during their pivotal resurgence? It really sucked the life out of TNA because at first it felt like, okay, they've got something here and they're going to be exciting and provide a nice alternative. And then that happened and other guys started leaving and it just seemed to suck the life out of something that they had there. So, I don't know. There's some guys that I like there, like Hammerstone, but I haven't really kept up with TNA much ever since it happened, so if that gives you any indication to my reaction to it. And it felt like Scott was like the spearhead or the guy that really led that TNA resurgence and really got them back to not where they were back in the 2000s, but got them back to a place where it was like they can survive and hopefully thrive. And then that rug just got pulled right out from under the company. But it is what it is. All right, do you think Dave Meltzer has created an unhealthy environment of wrestling analysis, news, and fandom? I don't think he created it. I think a lot of people inspired by him became somewhat toxic and brought that analysis to, because I don't think Dave Meltzer ever sought out to like ruin wrestling fandom or anything like that. He has a certain opinion on wrestling. He likes what he likes, and he just put his opinions out there, and a lot of people took him to be like a genius, and used him as kind of like a, their own personal machine gun to go out there and blast apart everything, everything else that was being put out there. So, I've made it no secret I have major disagreements with Dave Meltzer and how he analyzes pro wrestling and all of that fun stuff. I'm not a big star ratings proponent or anything like that, but I guess you could say it's his fault that you see a lot of, poor analysis in wrestling and a lot of things I don't agree with, and maybe even a little bit of that toxic fandom. I don't know, but I don't think it was ever his intention to do that. I think he was just a guy putting his opinions out there and trying to, establish himself using the newsletter, and then it just kind of snowballed from there, unfortunately. In your own opinion, why does it seem like the primary goal for modern wrestlers is to get the 5-star rating from Dave Meltzer? Like a lot of people just thought he was a genius and think that that's important to get that so crucial 5-star rating, when I could not care any less. If I was a wrestler, I wouldn't care if he gave me 5 stars. I want to draw money, get ratings, get crowd reaction, and have fans buy my merch. Like those would be the barometers for me. I don't really care if he gives me 5 stars or not. I just want to satisfy the fans and make money. That would be my goal if I ever got into the business, which would be a mistake because I'm a terrible performer and not a very good athlete. But hey, I would at least have the right mindset. All right, would you rather have a wrestler who had a long-term career but polarizing legacy like John Cena, or a wrestler with a short-term career but an admirable legacy like an Austin or a Rock? I say always keep them wanting more, and I would have, if I was in wrestling, you can have that huge top-tier run like Austin or Rock that you can then transition into something else and not have to throw yourself at the ground for a living. That would be ideal. Cena was just around for so long that when he left, I was like, I don't miss him at all. I don't miss John Cena one bit. And I was never exactly the biggest fan of his, but I don't know. I've always believed always leave him wanting more, not begging for you to leave. And this is certainly a case where it's I would have much rather had an Austin career or a Rock career over a John Cena career. He made money either way, so it's not like I'd be doomed in either scenario, but, Alright, next. Why won't anybody in AEW control Tony Khan considering his recent actions and behavior? Because he's the boss, and he's in charge, and nobody wants to tell him he's being a fucking idiot? That's probably why. And it's like, hey, as long as they're getting paid, they don't care, so, What are your thoughts and opinions on when Roman Reigns turned heel and became the tribal chief compared with his characterization from before? It was the run he always should have had. I said for years when they were pushing him as a babyface, the heir apparent to John Cena, I'm like, that's not going to work. That's not going to work because the fans have rejected him, and he can't be that guy. You can't just... he can't be The Rock. He can't be, John Cena or something like that. He's just not made or built to be that guy. So they turned him heel, made him the tribal chief, and lo and behold, he became one of the biggest and best main event stars in wrestling. And basically doing what he always should have been doing, or what they've always should have been preparing him for, instead of just filling John Cena's shoes. I thought overall the tribal chief run worked out much, much better than what he was doing before. Did you hear from a couple years ago the reason why WWE and Vince McMahon didn't turn Roman heel earlier is because they felt he wasn't ready for it? Do you believe this, or do you think it's just an excuse to make up for WWE and Vince McMahon's mediocre booking and stubbornness to push him their way? I think it's more the latter, because you look at him and he looks like a heel, and he was playing a heel in the Shield, so it's not like, oh, this guy can't be a heel, no, and it's like, I was like, what, so he was more ready to be a babyface? Because let me tell you, his promos as a babyface were flipping horrible. So if he was more ready for a face than a heel run, I'd shudder to think what his heel promos would have looked like if that was the case. So no, I think it's just they had it in their head, he's our next guy, and we're just going to push him down everybody's throats. And anything they say to the contrary is just them trying to cope, I think. All right. Nicholas Anderson. Next question. Thank you for submitting your questions. In your opinion, what do you think is the worst finishing move of all time? One that I always hated was Dino Bravo's side suplex, which was really just a sidewalk slam. But Dino Bravo, he's a big, thick guy, muscular, but he's not very tall. So the sidewalk slam looks better when it's somebody like Kevin Nash doing it, who's like, 7 feet tall, and he can kind of jump in the air and really drive the guy down and make it look good. With Dino Bravo, it looked like he picked the guy up and just kind of fell on his ass and looked like he was putting the guy to sleep. And it just never looked like that devastating or that good, but he always beat people with it. And I was just never a fan of that finisher. The heart punch never looked that good. Again, on paper, realistically, you're punching a guy right in the heart. Yeah, that could realistically win you a fight or two, but in wrestling, the striking looks less real, and it just doesn't come across as convincingly. Another one that sticks out to me is, sadly, Terry Funk's spinning toe holds. Terry, who's like one of the roughest, toughest looking guys, psychotic, some of the things he would do to make a match look brutal and violent, and his finishing hold was a spinning toe hold, which looks like one of the most easily escapable moves in pro wrestling history. It just didn't fit Terry, it didn't fit anything, it never looked good, and I just don't understand why he used that as a finisher. So those would be my picks. I have a special hatred for Dino Bravo's side suplex, though. That one just irritated me to no end when I was a kid. And non-wrestling question. If you could have any superpower, what would it be? Either teleportation or flight. So I wouldn't have to deal with traveling, and my commutes to work would be so much easier than they would be otherwise. So anything that makes my commute and travel easier, those would be the ones for me. All right. Dial F for Film. Thank you for your questions. All right, with the knowledge and depth of Vince McMahon's transgressions, how does it make you look at the on-screen material he had over the years? Personally, and again, in wrestling, you kind of have to do this. I've become an expert in separating the art from the artist, and that's just something I have to do. Vince did some great stuff when he was around, and I think he deserves credit for that great stuff. And it just kind of like separate the art from the artist. It's like, hey, when he was around, he was one of the best heels ever, and you can't take that away from him. Should he be given the Benoit treatment? I think for right now, probably, but I think over time, especially after he dies, that'll kind of any of those transgressions will probably fade away. Can we honestly ignore pillar moments in the company's history like Austin versus McMahon? No, you can't. That's the thing. But, hey, you know what? If Hogan could come back eventually, I'm sure Vince would be forgiven. Again, especially after he dies. Okay, next question comes in from Jake Owens. What would it take for you to stop watching AEW for a little while, like you said you've done with WWE a couple of times? It would have to be completely irredeemable. Like, when it gets to a point where it's completely irredeemable, which AEW is not at that point yet, although they've flirted with that line a couple of times. But I think for right now, occasionally there's a promo I like, occasionally there's an angle I like. I like Swerve as champion, although I wish they'd use him a little bit better. I'm kind of digging the evil EVP stuff right now, so there's it would have to get to a point where it's like so bad that it's completely irredeemable. And WCW got to that point for me in 99. WWF or WWE has gotten to that point with me a couple of times in their history, and AEW would have to get to like that level of bad for me to be completely unwilling to watch the show. All right. I'm sorry if I mispronounced this. Dun CK Retta 1. Despite being from England, I am a Baltimore Orioles fan. I used to come to America as a kid during the Cal Ripken era. My questions are, how did you become an Orioles fan? I was also a major Cal Ripken fan. I loved him. He was my big baseball hero. And my love and admiration for Cal Ripken, especially growing up in the area of Maryland, led to me becoming a lifelong Baltimore Orioles fan. Despite everything, because God knows it's been a hard road for the O's over the last couple of decades. How do you see our chances this season? Well, I thought last season we were going to make some hay in the playoffs, and it did not work out at all whatsoever. I mean, we crashed and burned so fast it was pathetic. But personally, like we should be able to make the playoffs, and hopefully we can make some hay, but We'll see. We shall see. I don't think you've ever declared for a soccer team, so would you mind declaring for Aston Villa in this Q&A? I have no idea. I don't follow soccer, so I don't know anything. I guess, yeah, I'll root for Aston Villa, but I don't watch soccer, and I've never been that interested in it. They have a similar story to the Orioles in that they were big in the 80s, have a dedicated fan base, and have experienced a revival recently. Oh, that's pretty cool. Good for them. All right, and final questions coming in from Matt Chapman. Wrestling question: can you name a wrestler who should not have been a world champion, or should not have won a world championship? Jinder Mahal. I mean, that's my answer, Jinder Mahal. And I'm not trying to, dogpile on him or anything, but they took a guy who was literally a jobber, and then they literally just turned him into a world champion overnight and expected everybody to buy it. And no, it just didn't work. It didn't work at all, unfortunately. And he's the one I look back on where it's like, man, really? Really? That's the one they went with. Okay. And final question, what is your personal so bad it's good movie? Oh, I've got so many of those. I've got so many so bad it's good movie. The Room, Troll 2, Showgirls is a masterpiece. Canon Films, virtually their entire library. I love Canon Films because they were a schlock factory in the 80s. Fantastic stuff. Is there any that... I'm trying to think of one. I mean, I was a big Mystery Science Theater fan in my youth, so a lot of those movies really stick out to me. I guess you could say the Gamera movies, the Cheeseball Factory. I'm a big kaiju fan, and those were like the cheesiest of the cheese, and I just love the Gamera movies for that. So I guess those would be my answers. But that wraps up this question and answers video. Thank you once again, everybody, for submitting your questions. If you wish to continue submitting questions or submit questions for the first time, you can send them to the email address listed in the description, and I will get to those questions in a future video. But that is all I have for you now. Thank you once again, everybody, for listening, and I will see you all later.